of nitrates in groundwater was listed as one of the world's top 10 water projects at the World Water Forum in 2009. And currently she's working on her PhD at the Charles Darwin University in Australia. So very welcome.
Hi, Boban. That's it. It's on.
You can use these are the easiest way to use this here. You can just move.
Yeah, it's in on power slide mode. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Fine.
You have to
Right.
back and forth.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here to share with you some of our experiences in the last 30 years of doing this. And I'm going to showcase 3 case studies, but also try and explain to you the background that these studies have been set in, and also to explain to you the technology, one aspect of the technology that has been used in restoration. To look at Sri Lanka, we're not a very large country. We have 3 main agroecological zones, the wet, intermediate and dry zones, that are based on the 75% probability of rainfall and soil. We have geologically 3 peneplains or plains of erosion, starting from the low, middle and the high, that goes up to about 6,000 to 7,000 feet above sea level. Our main mountain areas are based in the central mountain massif. Is this pointer as well?
Yeah, but it's better to use the mouse actually.
Okay. The mouse. Okay. Where is the mouse? That's the central mountain massif. We are, because of the diversity of rainfall and soils and temperatures and our local climates, we host a huge diversity of huge biodiversity, and therefore are a global biodiversity hotspot. We're densely populated. We have more than 21 million people in this size of an area, and we are an island heavily reliant on agriculture, though I must say we have a very old system of agriculture. So having said that, I'd also like to say to you, with the 21 million population, we have a tremendous problem with forest loss due to colonization. We were colonized by the Portuguese, Dutch and British in that order, and of course slash and burn agriculture. Our closed canopy forests were 84% in 1881 and now are less than 29%. This 29% includes monocultures of eucalyptus, pinus and now acacia. And of the 29%, maybe we have about 8% under natural forest cover. So our home gardens, on the other hand, occupy 15% of our landscape, and this amount of area is increasing by 1%. Of course, these percentages don't mean very much, but I mean they're percents. But to say it, what is important here to say is we've lost forest cover, we're losing forest cover, but one of the ways that we can bring forest back is to go into tree-dominated agriculture, and that is the crux of my presentation today. So in this respect, I will look at the types of restoration done and categorize them into rehabilitation, reclamation and restoration. And so our early efforts, and even till today, have been with planting monocultures of exotic species, teak, pinus and eucalyptus in this fashion. One of the main problems is the lack of understory. Our more recent efforts have been with people and in community forestry, where, like I said, converting home gardens to forest gardens, and the absolute critical need to address people's livelihoods and enrich these home gardens with a high diversity of species that will field all kinds of different utilities, starting with food. So in 1982, we began to working with analog forestry. Doesn't mean very much, the word, but it means a hell of a lot on the ground, where home gardens, like I said, are converted or rehabilitated to forest gardens. So in these forest gardens, the whole deal is, if you look at a landscape and trying to bring it back, where you have, I'm just going to be myself, and all this technology, I'm just going to be myself and tell you guys what this is, okay? So best, right. So the deal is, if you go into a landscape and you look at, oh my gosh, now how are we going to bring this thing back? And if you look at the way it happens in nature, it starts with the grasses and the small trees and the shrubs and the big trees. And this process, if you just let it happen, will take about 1,000 years. Now, we don't have that time. We need it to happen now. Okay? So, what are we going to do? What we look at is, we have the first serial. So these stages of growth, or referred to commonly as stages of serial succession, where one landscape goes into another landscape, goes into another landscape, and this ecological maturity takes a long time. What we look at is to bring all this together in one shot, mama, in one shot, right? Now, so hopefully we start with agriculture, then go into permaculture, and then go into this analog forest that has all this. However, we need people to eat also. They need to eat. When we plant a tree, that blessed thing takes 1 year and 5 years to grow, to produce. So what are they going to do in the meanwhile? So if we're going, and this is why that gentleman's, your presentation is so important, that it isn't simple, it's a complex thing, mate, It takes time. And when you're going into restoring these systems, you're not only restoring because you want the trees to grow and carbon and biodiversity and all this jazz. People have to eat. And so when you're going into enriching a home garden with trees and whatnot, the first thing you're looking at is a household need. What do they need? And when you go into a garden and say, wow, that plant, Aristolochia indica, is superb. It's a superb butterfly plant. You think the farmer's worried? No. He doesn't care. He doesn't care. What he is interested in is, now, can I sell that? Can we eat that? So that need is the most important thing in this design of landscapes. It is complex. However, the whole idea in showing you this is to place these 3 different case studies within the framework of landscape succession, serial succession, and for you gentlemen and ladies to understand, okay, now where do we start? Where does this pivot? Where is it placed? Where is it going from here? Is what I'm trying to hopefully make you understand. So this business of placing restoration or rehabilitation, which I'd rather use, because you cannot bring a forest back to what it was. That takes a long, millions of years. You can rehabilitate it. You can try to bring it back. And so this positioning of restoration in an agro-ecosystem with the farmer, the family, the local administration, all these forest department, all these world wildlife people, and all the wildlife people, and all the politicians, important in our landscape, politicians, is to see that the farmer gets something to eat first. And so looking at this restoration in a serial continuum, where when you go and speak to the farmer about bringing the landscape back, you can either give him the choice to design his landscapes where he has a greater piece of his land in annual cropping, which is the first serial stage, or you can give him fruit trees and smaller trees to give him the second serial stage, and you can design his landscape in maybe a wood lot or a small copse of trees or the little forest around his property or around the well, as in the third serial stage. So when you are going to work, or one is going to work with the farmer, one is understanding where that land is, what the land is all about, where is the water flowing, how is the air blowing, wind blowing, and then what most importantly is what the farmer wants. So this is in the eastern part of Sri Lanka, in Ampara, which was the most terribly affected in the 2004 tsunami. So you have, this is a little inwards, so you have Melvaganam's land in 2011 and 2012. You can bring it back very fast. Of course, you need water and you need warm sunlight and the species that the farmer thinks he wants. This is the next one, which is in exactly next to the ocean, again east coast of Sri Lanka, affected by the tsunami. Most of the problems with the tsunami was that people were living just next to the sea, and so when the wave came, they went, you know. And so in this situation, we have two aspects. One is the forest gardens, and the other one is the coastal forest. So it was like this. And so we brought back a coastal forest. It was not just planting trees one night, it was a properly programmed thing where the enclosures were constructed over 3 kilometers in the east coast. And before we planted, we heavily mulched this area with Iconia crassips. We use water hyacinth as a green manure. It's an excellent green manure. And we brought in paddy straw. So we prepared the ground before we brought the species in. And then we used maybe about 83% of the planting was native species, with some using casuarina, which is mostly a windbreak at the start. But as you can see now, the Scaviola takkada, which is a front line, and further on with Vatakeya pandanacea. And then the several native species of forests that grow in here. So the design is up to about 60% using indigenous and native species, and the balance 40% is exotics. So when you do this rehabilitation, you know, you might have to use exotic species as well. It's just a managed thing, and it's an anthropogenic landscape. It's not like going next to the Singharaja rainforest, which is our prime rainforest, and saying, okay, here am I going to plant jackfruit here. No. Jackfruit is an exotic species. It's indigenous. It comes from India. So this is the forest gardens aspect to this. This is what it looked like. So many different species and trees and plants were used, and that's how the early forest garden starts. So if you notice, while the trees are planted in the understory, it's a farmer's choice. It has to do with what he wants. The quick growing annual crops, that's in the understory. So it's a high diversity. And then with this is the biological pesticides and biological fertilizers, and from vermiculture to liquid fertilizer, I mean enormous amounts of inputs, different transition, different technologies. So when you go and tell the farmer, look mate, now you got to grow this organically, and he's scratching his head because he knows only how to use curator and one-shot and judo and jumbo. These are the names of the pesticides. Okay, you have to have an alternative. Your package has to be a full package. You can't go there and scratch your head and say, because his whole livelihood depends on what you're bringing in. So this is in the first year. You can see this is the consumption value, or the value of the amount of food they took from their gardens to eat. And this is how much he sold. So this is the pre-tsunami mean. And in a year, they overshot that. So the problem here is in the second and third year there was drought, and still. This is another case study which is in the southwest of Sri Lanka. It used to be fully covered with forest, but after colonization, a lot of the forest was cut to plant coffee, tea, and now rubber. And then after that, the greater amount of forest cut in Sri Lanka was in the aftermath of the colonials. It is our people who did it. So now this area is a watershed of the Maragala Oya, which is a feeder stream to a major river in Sri Lanka. And so how we did it was we looked at all the different ecosystems. We looked at did several biodiversity inventories. We looked at the soils. There are 3 different elevations on this mountain. We talked to the farmers, did baseline mapping from garden level to landscape level, and then the landscape design was for each garden, for the entire landscape as a whole. And so the gardens were like this. Most of it was cut for slash and burn agriculture. And we went in, planted Glycidia as a nurse species and also as a shade for pepper, which was our main crop here. So you're talking to the farmers, they're saying pepper may grow, and bringing in a lot of the riparian vegetation, because this had 23 feeder streams on this mountain. So bringing back the riparian vegetation, but throughout the whole importance was, the first important thing was food, then medicine, aesthetics. And this covering rocks, as Friedrich asked me, what do you mean by covering rocks? Now, you know, this landscape has a lot of open, bare, big rock, granitic gneiss. And so the point is, when the forest is cut and the rocks are exposed, the ambient temperature level increases. Faster transpire, faster evaporation of water. But when you cover these rocks with climbers and shade of other trees, etc., these rocks become like water towers. They become with moist and ferns, and they generate water. So that's what I mean by covering rocks. Yep, I'm going fast. Right. So this is what it was before. Now this is what it looks like now. And I welcome you anytime you come to Sri Lanka. Give me a shout. You can go see. And so this biodiversity corridor is what you're looking at. That's what was there on the other side of here. And this is what's been created. And this biodiversity corridor is what leads me to my next bit of work. And so while we're doing this restoration, we have different students coming in, and we use their input to do evaluation, to look at different aspects. And one of these studies was done by an MSc student from Imperial College in England. He looked at bird populations, frequency and diversity of bird population in two different forest habit types. He looked at the natural forest and he looked at the new forest. And what he found was what we all know, that of course the forest species are there are different kinds of species of birds were looked at. That is the forest dwellers and the forest dwellers, the non-forest dwellers, that is the guys who live in the anthropogenic dominant areas, and those who live in both areas. And so what we did find is that there were increases in forest dwellers in the forest gardens. Now I'm not going into a detail in this because of the lack of time, but very quickly biodiversity can be used, or the frequency and the distribution of biodiversity, different types of biodiversity, can be used to measure the success of restoration excellently. From birds to snakes to snails, a lot of work has been done. Yeah, so you can see the forest garden, the richness was higher in the forest than in the forest garden, though it's growing. This is after 2 years. And then in terms of economics, this is from my latest research, and I was thought to share it with you. Income levels have gone up exponentially, but what is interesting here is you're seeing 3.35 million as the income from Jane Nona. Jane Nona is one farmer there, her garden. Out of this 3.356, 3 million is from timber. So you will ask me, now, how are these guys cutting down the trees? You're saying they are restoring, but they are cutting down the trees. Yeah, they have to cut down the trees. They needed the timber to build a new house. So this is the complexity of such things. So which means 356,000 was the profit. Was the gross profit, and the farmer was left with, after expenditure, with 160,000 rupees a year, which is not much, but it's a lot. And of this, the amount of money he spent from external resources was 95,000, and from his own family resources was 65,000 odd. So, Sri Lankan rupees. One Sri Lankan rupee, I don't know how much the krona is, but is 125 US one US dollar is 125 Sri Lankan rupees, something like that. And so this is the last case study. This is in a drought. This is more drought adaptation in the lowlands. So this was dry native mixed forest monsoon. This was cleared to plant coconut and cashew many years ago. This is what it looked like. This is what it looks like now. And we used here so many different types of plants and native species and all that. And what we did was we used mammals as indicators of success. Now this area is, as a crow flies, maybe 20 kilometers from Vilpattu National Park, which is based on the west coast of Sri Lanka. And and the number of mammal species seen in this restored landscape after 10 years was almost 50% of what is observed in the park. So that's an interesting thing. And if you look at where mammals are positioned in the food chain, in the hierarchy. So we have the painted bat that's seen daily. Painted bat hides in the dry banana leaves. And you have the loris, which is my favorite. Loris is difficult to bring back, but it's come back with a family. Lives on Hullmiller, Beria cordiifolia. And this one, I think, is an antelope rat, which is seen rarely. But the important thing here is that, to go back to my friend's questions, you can see there's increase in biodiversity, frequency, there's increase in income, there's increase in landscapes, people have more than they have. But at the end of the day, even though I am actively involved in the field, when we do the valuation or the value or look into the real value of forest rehabilitation, what is it that we're looking at? Are we looking at the social, biophysical, cultural? What is it? Or are we looking at the whole jolly lot? Whose assessment counts? Ours? No. Ours is not important. Farmer's assessment for me is more important. Because if he's happy, if he thinks that it's the next best thing to slice bread, he'll do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Melvani, for this excellent exposé.
I'm in time, right?
Yes, you're very well in time. So now we do have time for questions. So let's open up the floor. And please present yourself again and your affiliation. That's excellent. Then we get to know each other better. Yes.
Yeah, Ngolia Kimanzo again from the Salvation Army, Sweden. Kamy, the farmers you work with, are they organized in some kind of cooperatives? And if so, what kind of challenges do they get in marketing their products that you
more than mentioned? Being cooperative, there is a lot of group mobilization that has occurred with the PRA and all these technologies in the last 20 odd years. Some of them are members of groups, some of them aren't. There is no social, externally posited cohesive network that is prevalent in all areas. So it depends. Yep.
Jan Gunnarsson from Copenhagen University. I had two questions. The first one is concerning in West Africa, for example, we have the rain period, a long rain period. And the one problem there is to introduce crop rotation to prolong the growing time to get more food. You have the same issues in your country. Yep. My second question is about alley cropping, where you are cropping in alleys. You have home gardens. Is it another principle than alley cropping, or can you combine these two?
We have a rainfall regime has northeast and a southwest monsoon and two intermonsoons in meeting. Most farmers do their major rice cropping in the Maha season or the northeast when the rains of the northeast monsoon. But one thing is that when you start on, agroforestry based landscape design and you start bringing in shade and your soil moisture regime start changing, within the 2 or 3 years, you find changes in the farmer's ability to be resilient to large-scale fluctuations. Of course, this has no bearing and very difficult to deal with when you have a higher rainfall variability like we're facing now, where you can't historically rely on, you can't rely on the historical time at which the monsoon will come, and that's a problem, I think, that's widespread. However, in terms of rotation, where you have a fair deal of money coming from the tree crops, it acts like a cushion. And the difference in the amount of money farmers are making, this is from my current research in 85 locations, is that the amount of money they are making from the tree and perennial crops is more than 90% of the money they are making on the seasonal crops. So the whole dynamic changes. Yeah. Does that answer your question? And alley cropping. Now, alley cropping, or if it's a large scale area and there's land space, is a problem. 2.2 acres would be a large landscape land holding in Sri Lanka. If it's a small estate, tea estate, or where there is adequate land, then you can do alley cropping, but otherwise hedgerows are what we adopt in terms of Gliricidia hedgerows, if you're familiar with that. That's important. Alley cropping is important, but different technique.
And are you collaborating them between villages, or how does it work? Because normally one estate is very small, or a management unit is very small. So
when you go into a village, Frederick, there's what's he doing? He's planting pepper. We'll also plant pepper. That's how it works.
Very good.
So it's a continuum.
Excellent.
Okay.
Very good.
Otherwise, okay.
Matthias Johnson, Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. You nicely showed that those home gardens and new forests can attract biodiversity, birds and mammals and so on. Have you also looked at what kind of services or disservices they are providing for the farmers in terms of, birds can eat pest caterpillars, for example. At the same time, other birds can be pests. There can be wildlife raiding crops and things like that.
Actually, we have a major problem now with monkeys and giant squirrels. We've cut down all our forests and we have no habitat. And so the farmer in the lowlands and in the intermediate zone up to about maybe 4,000 feet above sea level, we have a massive problem with monkeys and giant squirrels. So now farmers are taking to air rifles to get rid of the giant squirrels.
Okay, and do they see this as a sort of a negative side effect of planting trees? Actually, or it's not?
But the thing is, we have also this Buddhist culture where we also have a certain patience. Oh, well, they're eating the coconuts. Well, you must visit Sri Lanka. Madeline and Eskil, who have visited. We have when we grew paddy, okay, we would keep Kurulupalu, a certain part of our paddy contiguum tract, for parrots. Okay, we call them for birds. That area was for birds. So we have this thing in our heads.
University. I'm a bit interested in how much is this restoration built on earlier existing local knowledge? I mean, if you're going back to a great extent to how they did it early before the colonization and so on, and if so, how did you identify this knowledge and how do you involve people in coming in with their knowledge to enrich these methods you are using today?
Forest gardens have been in Sri Lanka for, I don't know, I was reading a book the other day from 9 to 10 BC. So this whole thing is based on old wisdom. What we try is to project the wisdom of our past into the future. That's what my teacher told me. So nothing is new. Everything is known. What is the problem is we're also dealing with glyphosate and urea now, which we didn't have to deal with. We're also dealing with far more people and far less forest cover and far less water and climate variability. So we have to go with the flow. So there is science, but science so inextricably woven with wisdom from our past.
Very good. Thank you so much for this very clear and interesting presentation. We can conclude that the restoration is very complicated and it takes time. And what we need to focus upon is the households themselves. And now we also know how to build water towers. Excellent. Okay, so now the morning session is finished.